Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. It's always difficult to follow my colleague from Calgary, Forrest Lawn, who has articulated the concerns with Bill C-50 so very well, again, on top of the work of our great colleague, the Member of Parliament from Lakeland. And Madam Speaker, I really want to talk about the implications and how dangerous this mandated threat to hundreds of thousands of Canadian jobs is entailed in this just transition legislation. I want to be clear to the members in this House that this careless Liberal NDP government and this bill will shatter the prosperity, the stability, and the economics of Canada and the provinces and our energy and agriculture sectors. And indeed, rather than being proud of the sustainability, the innovation, and the skill sets that we have developed here in Canada, the Liberal government, the Liberal NDP government is proud about the number of jobs they will be eliminating through this legislation. And I want to be very clear because these are the stats right from the government's own memos that come with the just transition legislation. According to the government's internal briefings, this legislation will kill 170,000 direct jobs, displace 450,000 direct and indirect jobs, and cause large-scale disruptions to manufacturing, agriculture, transportation, energy, and construction sectors, impacting 2.7 million jobs. The Liberals and the NDP talk about jobs, but the jobs that they are talking about is the jobs that they will be eliminating through this legislation. Now, this legislation is also targeted and divisive. There's no question it will disproportionately harm the economies and the jobs in primarily BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, New Brunswick, and Newfoundland and Labrador. There's no doubt that there's no coincidence that the energy sector is a large contributor to the GDP and the economics of these provinces. The GDP in Alberta, this is about 27.3%, 36% in Newfoundland and Labrador, and this will affect 187,000 jobs in Alberta and more than 13,000 workers in Newfoundland and Labrador. The Commissioner of the Environment and Sustainable Development stated that the government is not prepared to provide appropriate support to more than 50 communities and 170,000 workers who will be impacted by this legislation. So the government could talk about, oh, this is a just transition to these new jobs that aren't there, Madam Speaker. As my colleague said, it's about 1% of the employment provided in Canada is from renewables. 1%. We are talking about 450,000 direct and indirect jobs and maybe 2.7 million jobs across the other sectors that this will impact. Those jobs don't exist. So to say this is a transition to future employment is simply being misleading. Now, where have we seen something like this before, where the Liberals are plowing ahead with legislation based on ideology and activism without listening to the concerns of other parties, the provinces, the territories? I don't know, Madam Speaker, where have we heard that before? Oh, right, C-69, where we just had the Supreme Court wrap the knuckles, maybe a bit more than wrapping the knuckles, of the Liberal government for plowing ahead with divisive, vindictive, ideological legislation just for the sake of hammering other provinces that have industries that they don't agree with. C-69 was an attack on provincial jurisdiction, legislation that all provinces, all territories either opposed or demanded massive changes to. But the Liberals ignored every single one of those concerns. But, Madam Speaker, the damage has already been done from C-69. It chased billions of dollars of investment out of this country and cost our economy thousands of jobs. And don't get me wrong, Madam Speaker, as a result of C-69, you bet projects were built and jobs were created, just not in Canada. They were built and created in other jurisdictions around the world. Canada lost billions of dollars in investment, but we also, Madam Speaker, lost our best and brightest, who had to go to other jurisdictions to get that employment and have their research and their innovations accepted. Now, it's just as the provinces and territories are trying to stop the bleeding as a result of the Supreme Court decision on the No Pipelines bill, here the Liberals go again, wham, 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 with more ideological, vindictive and divisive legislation aimed at only a few provinces that will eliminate hundreds of thousands of jobs. And not only that, it will increase the likelihood of energy poverty and food insecurity, not only here in Canada, but perhaps around the world. On a global scale, the Liberals will jeopardize Canada's ability to provide clean and sustainable energy and agriculture for customers around the world, and certainly those countries who need it the most. Bill C-50 plans to phase out the oil and gas sector, and it will have harsh and real consequences that should not be taken lightly. I can't be more clear, Madam Speaker. This unjust transition legislation will leave Canada in economic shambles. Now, today I want to highlight something specific which I think has not been given enough attention. This half-baked legislation from the NDP Liberal government will certainly increase the cost of living for Canadians, and it ignores our world-class energy and agriculture industries. But it will also cost us almost 300,000 jobs in the agriculture sector. Most of the speeches today have been talking about fossil fuels and energy, but in the government's own memos, it is also targeting 300,000 jobs in the agriculture sector. Now, there is about 65,000 vacancies in agriculture already, so I'm not exactly sure where these 300,000 jobs are actually going to come from. And 1 in 9 jobs in Canada are directly linked to agriculture and agri-food. But the minister's own memo brags about cutting 300,000 jobs from agriculture and the agri-food sectors. When globally, food security and food affordability is one of the top priorities. So rather than try to find ways to address that by reducing taxes, reducing red tape, ensuring we have reliable supply chain to get our products to market, the Liberals have found another way to add on additional red tape, additional regulations, and additional burdens on one of our most important industries. Food inflation is already up 7% over last year. And the government has made these ideological promises that we've met with the grocery. We have done, as the industry minister said yesterday in question period, we have done what no government has ever done before. We called the 5 grocery CEOs here to Parliament and give them a little what for. He makes it sound like they landed a man on Mars. We actually had the 5 grocery CEOs at the Agriculture Committee 8 months ago. You know, way to be on top of it. He sends a letter to the Agriculture Committee to study this issue 2 days after the government tables its reply to the study that we did 8 months ago. It just shows how out of touch this government is with what's actually going on the ground. But what it also ignores, Madam Speaker, is the incredible results that we've had here in Canada without government intervention, without government taxes. If Canadian energy was exported around the world, as should have happened with Japan and Germany, who came to Canada to access our LNG, and the Liberals said no. So instead they went and signed an agreement with Qatar for natural gas. Do you think Qatar has the same environmental standards as Canada? The same human rights or labor standards as Canada? If you were trying to reduce emissions, you did the exact opposite by turning them away and making them go to Qatar. But if we were allowed to get our energy to market, we would actually reduce global emissions by 23%. Now that is actual success. Canada's oil and gas sector is about 0.3% of global emissions. And our record in agriculture is even more impressive. Canada's about 2.6% of global emissions. Of that, agriculture is about 8% of that 2.6%. Compare that to globally, the global average for each other country is about 26%. That shows you the incredible success that Canadian agriculture has had. But instead of rewarding that impeccable record for Canadian agriculture, Canadian energy, and the workers and scientists and researchers who work in those industries, the Liberal NDP government wants to punish them, eliminate these industries which are so critical to Canada's economy. The revenue from these 2 industries build schools, build hospitals, build roads, pay for the social programs that we rely on. But they ignore that. Madam Speaker, in conclusion, Conservatives are the only party that will find common sense solutions to the problems facing Canadians, and we will be proud of our resource sectors and the men and women who make their living in those industries. Thank you very much.
Questions and comments?